Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd consider subscribing to my channel, it would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mara Quinn, 36, and at my mother's Sunday dinner, my stepfather flicked the remote and threw a photo of the mildewed bathtub from my half-gutted roadside motel onto the TV while glasses clinked and someone laughed too hard. Then he raised a toast to Mara's little charity as if the image were a punchline. And when the neighbor dropped by with a pie and asked who ran the place, my mother waved a hand she just manages while I sat there with the deed tucked in my tote and the word owner caught behind my teeth, the neon vacancy from that photo buzzing like it was aimed at me. After dishes and small talk, I drove back to the quiet box I had signed for off the Grand Central Parkway in Queens. 12 rooms around a narrow corridor, and a lobby that smelled faintly of old smoke and fresh primer. And I stood in the stillness imagining morning light sliding across warm brass, crisp sheets that fell flat under a hand, and a coffee station that would hiss before dawn, because a good cup tells a guest that's somebody planned for them. The parking lot was empty except for my hatchback, and an oil stain shaped like Florida. The neon hiccuped its word like a bad habit. And yet the quiet felt like permission I had to claim rather than wait for. I had worked double shifts to get here, sold my old car to patch the roof, and learned to feather joint compound from a slow, patient painter who showed me how to make a seam disappear by not rushing the last inch. And every time trash hit the dumpster, it sounded like a promise kept. The ledger I found in the office drawer had curled edges and pencil notations in a hand that cared about every pillowcase. And I ran my fingers over those pressed numbers, imagining the woman who once sat behind a desk in the same room making sure the hot water did not give up before sunrise. I wanted a micro hotel that was safe, simple, and steady. The sort of place single women, traveling nurses, and tournament vendors could count on without worrying about noise or surprises. The dream was not glamorous. It was clean and sturdy. And the more I scrubbed and sanded, the more the building felt like it could carry its weight again. The morning after that dinner, Kendall called from her car to say the contractor had pulled her cabinets and could she stash 3 boxes in my lobby just for the weekend. While my mother chimed in that the kids could nap in 2 rooms during tile cutting and it would be a blessing to have somewhere quiet. I said yes because a couple of days felt harmless, and because I had been raised to say yes when family sounded tired. And I hung up without thinking how naps and boxes fit into a place that wasn't open. At 7 the next morning, I unlocked the front door and nearly tripped over a stroller behind the desk, a diaper bag drooping on the velvet bench I had reupholstered with sore fingers, and my chalkboard welcome sign had been turned into a cheerful announcement about a soft opening for family and friends. My mother had posted a photo the night before and tagged me like a ribbon on a new shop. Cousins were tapping heart icons and asking if they could stop by. And by noon, a relative I hadn't seen since high school stood in the lobby with iced coffee and a grin, asking if she could peek at the rooms for a friend coming for the tennis. What should have been a weekend slid into a week without anyone marking the seam. Boxes thickened into piles. The fire door was wedged open for air that did not care about my insurance. And my stepfather found the only outlet that didn't flicker and set up to work remotely while a game droned through tinny speakers. I swept crushed crackers from the stairwell after midnight, refolded towels with the speed I'd learned on other people's floors, and noticed my sister-in-law had lined up shampoo bottles on the window ledge like a neat little store that never paid rent. A delivery driver arrived with room chairs I'd been paying off for months and asked who the owner was while my mother, delighted by the activity, said I was helping manage, but the receipt in his hand printed my name on the proprietor line, and he tapped it with a knuckle and left the boxes by the hall. In the evenings, I opened a notebook that had once held recipes and now held every small cost. The detergent that vanished too fast, the water bill that climbed by days rather than weeks, paper supplies slipping toward empty in a house with no paying guests. And I watched the bottom of my savings flatten into a number that felt like a held breath. I tried the sentences that had always made me easy to love, maybe. Could we? Thanks for understanding, and they slid off my family's need, the way rain runs off glass. which is to say, without friction. At 2:11 on a weeknight, with the neon washing the lobby pink, I called a locksmith and scheduled a rush install of smart locks for all 12 doors with a deposit that made my ribs ache. Then booked a life safety recheck for morning because I wanted that slip of paper saying the city had looked and decided I could welcome strangers. The installer showed up before dawn with steaming coffee and worked down the hall in a calm rhythm that made time feel stretchable under steady hands, lifting old metal that had swallowed too many keys and setting clean devices that blinked agreement. At noon, a property manager a friend insisted I meet, walked the halls with me, tapped a smoke alarm that blinked too fast, slid an exit map up half an inch, tucked house rules into a clear sleeve by the door, and when the inspector arrived, he tested alarms, checked extinguishers and locks, and stamped his form with the certainty of a person who knows what a green light means to a building like mine. The rooms looked like rooms rather than promises, and I took photos that did not hide corners, then set a booking page with rates linked to the tennis week that turns our neighborhood into a hive, because when the courts glow at night, the trains hum longer, and every bed within a few stops is spoken for. I flipped the small desk placard to read soft open and breathed like I finally believed that now meant now. And that afternoon, an electrician read my name on a form and addressed me as the owner without looking to my mother for approval. Caught my eye and smiled in that quiet way. Something turns without a sound. And a man tied to the tournament called about 4 rooms for a crew recording late and sleeping hard. The kind of voice that assumes you can do the job because you answered the phone. He said he would send a simple agreement and use my name without curling it into something smaller. And over the next 2 days, the calendar filled the way a chessboard fills, one steady move after another, until tournament week read like a rhythm of arrivals and departures rather than blank squares daring me to fail. My lobby still looked too much like a family room. Coloring books on the coffee table, a kettle I did not buy hissing on a power strip where nothing should be plugged, and the voices rose and fell around me as plans were made without my name. Who would watch the first round? Who needed a late code? Who would take the kids to a park that had nothing to do with me? I let the posted rules do the work my voice could not, a boundary that did not need argument to stand. On Friday, my phone pulsed with a message from my mother saying their Midtown hotel had overbooked and asking if I could help because everything nearby was full. And I sent the public booking link, marked 2 rooms to hold until 8, and added nothing else. The lobby filled with the low growl of rolling suitcases and the small clatter people make when they set down a life for a night. And a coach in a navy cap thanked me across the counter with an absent thanks. Boss that floated and landed right where it should. Kendall stopped what she was saying and looked around at the brass, the linen shades, the framed map of the park, then at me like she was learning a new light. My mother and stepfather arrived winded and apologizing into the air about the hotel's mistake, and I handed over access codes written cleanly on small cards and the printed house rules in the same calm font that hung by the door, the way I do for anyone. My sister hovered in the old posture that asks for slack without naming it, and I let the room hold the shape of the rules so I did not have to. When my mother asked if there was a family rate, I tilted the page toward the posted prices that had climbed for the event, and she nodded and entered her card without asking for a softer conversation. The codes were set to expire at 10 in the morning. There was coffee at 6, and extra towels could be requested on a note by the tray. It was all there in writing, and for once writing was enough. They learned the rhythm most guests learn in a day, knocking on the front desk rather than slipping behind it, leaving requests on paper instead of calling my name from doorways, letting late-night talk fall low enough to fold into someone else's sleep. And the lobby felt like the place I had pictured when I first turned a key here. 10 o'clock came on quiet feet, and Kendall was still upstairs laughing about shoes, and the system posted a half-day fee when her code remained active past the minute. I did not reverse it, and I did not call her name. I slid a neat receipt into a clear sleeve and waited. She read it, blinked, said she had not realized, and I said, "This is how we do it here, not unkind and not up for debate." My stepfather stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the small frame I had hung behind the desk that read, Owner Mara Quinn in black type next to an old beach photo where I had been cropped off by accident. And he looked at both, and then at me, and something unspoken settled between us. My mother thanked me at the counter in the way guests thank a structure that holds without squeezing. And when her hand lifted for the old hug that makes you small, she stopped, adjusted to the height of the desk between us, and squeezed my hand instead. And the hotel felt like a quiet shape both of us could live with. The rest of the week ran without the panic that used to live under my ribs. Uma scheduled cleaners, straightened a shade with a fingertip, sent codes that expired when they should, and each morning began with the hush of the machine and faces that held the look of people with somewhere important to be. When the last crew checked out and left a note about unexpected quiet during a loud week, I tucked my feet under the desk and watched afternoon light turn the brass the color of toast, thinking about rooms where I had explained my plan and watched my words turn apologetic under other people's faces. The calendar did not go empty when the matches ended. A nurse booked a short stay between shifts. A vendor needed 2 nights while a stand went up. A woman traveling alone chose my place because the front door looked like it led to something gentle, and the building found a different kind of life than a flickering sign. I hired 2 part-time cleaners from the neighborhood who worked with the quiet competence of people who know what a shining bathroom does for a morning. And Uma took the late calls that used to drag me into the lobby in a robe. And my hands stopped splitting at the cuticles because I remembered gloves before bleach, rather than after. A week later, my mother called with a bright idea to host Thanksgiving at the hotel, so everyone could see the improvements and we could make a long table in the lobby. And I told her the private event rate with the same easy tone I use when I explain the front latch needs a firmer pull. She paused. And in the silence where the old argument might have lived, she said she understood I had to keep my place a place, and we shifted to talk about the pie she would bake in her own kitchen, and how my nephew was learning to tie his shoes and losing the loop half the time. I printed a small sign that read, "No family discounts. Thank you for understanding," in the same calm font as the rest of the hotel, and smoothed out air bubbles with the edge of a card, because even a boundary should sit right. The building's worth climbed in a way a broker could explain, with numbers that did not change how the counter felt under my hand when I wiped dust from the baseboards. And what mattered more was the soft chime when a code expired on time and a door clicked closed behind someone who left their room as neat as they found it. My family's language shifted without ceremony. My mother at the market telling a friend my hotel stayed busy during tennis and the coffee tasted like care. My sister at school pickup saying she couldn't host a sleepover because I had real guests and early checkouts, and it sounded like relief rather than performance. In late December, when a snowstorm turned plows into metronomes, Kendall clicked the same link as everyone else, booked a room for the night, checked out at 10, and sent me a message saying only that the room was warm and she slept well. On a slow afternoon after the new year, I found a cardboard box with keys that matched no locks, a stack of postcards printed with a disconnected number, and a faded brochure that promised cable television and ice. And I slid them into the bin with a care that had nothing to do with trash. I lifted the Owner Mara Quinn frame off the wall and polished the glass until the letters looked as crisp as the day I printed them, then held it next to the beach photo where the sun cut across faces and my arm was half in and half out of the shot, feeling the difference between being cropped by accident and standing inside a frame you chose. Uma and I made a small Monday ritual of walking the halls without talking, checking a baseboard with a fingertip, adjusting a crooked print, making sure the promises on the wall matched the feeling underfoot. The bodega owner 2 blocks over sent anyone with a lost look my way and told them to ask for Mara, not the lady or the manager, just the name that fit what I did. And once at the bakery, a woman tapped my sleeve and said she had stayed during the tennis, and there was a kindness in the way coffee was always ready that made her feel like a person, not a slot. In spring, I tore plastic from a stack of bedspreads and ironed the first corners myself, because habits learned early still calm the day. and I wrote 4 promises to myself in the same notebook that once held recipes on our check-in and check-out. Without exceptions, I can't sustain. Keep rates honest and clear. Partner with neighbors I know by name. And never make the building carry the weight of family that belongs somewhere else. I called it my Grand Slam, a private tally that mattered more to me than any cheer from the stands. That summer, my stepfather stopped by with a fan under his arm and set it on the desk as if testing a new language. Said he'd found it on sale and it would help if the machine went down. And I thanked him without making more of it than it was. When a cousin asked if she could bring friends and hang out in the lobby on a Friday night while they figured out what to do, my mother told her the lobby was for guests and sent a list of nearby diners without adding my name to the end of the message. Autumn returned with the smell of tennis balls and fried onions. Out-of-town fans arrived with eyes full of hope and relief, and the night settled into a hum where voices stayed low. Doors clicked softly, and the hallways held nothing louder than footsteps. Late one evening after a full run, I pressed a strip of clear tape under the no family discount sign because its edge had lifted, smiling at the care I took with a piece of paper that had become a line I wouldn't cross. I knew now the difference between the kindness that costs you nothing and the old habit of giving away what you can't afford to lose. And the rightness of each code that expired on time felt like a small stone set in mortar. In the quiet after a busy weekend, I sat with the ledger open and thought about the first time I traced pencil notes made by another hand, wondering whether she too had stood in this room on a wet morning and felt private gratitude for hot water and guests who left on time. They had laughed at a dream that fit badly in a bad photograph, and then they booked my hotel at full price when the city filled and my rooms kept their promises. And over time, the thing that stayed was not the charge that went through or the calendar running red, but the small curve of my mother's fingers stopping at the counter and choosing a steadier touch. I did not return to the version of myself that made things easier at my expense. I did not explain why the late fee posted when it would have been simpler to pretend, and I did not apologize for running a business as a business. And the oddest part was how quiet the victory felt, like a clean floor you only notice when it isn't. On damp evenings, the sign hums in a way that used to sound like vacancy and now sounds like a metronome steady. Sure, just loud enough to keep time while I lock the front door with the easy motion of someone not waiting to be interrupted. I wipe the counter, switch off the machine, and take a breath that takes all of the day with it. Not to hold, but to keep company until morning, and I think about my private Grand Slam and how I won it by refusing to explain the rules that already hung on the wall. So, when someone asks how it ended, I think of a hallway that smells faintly of citrus and clean cotton, a small frame that calls me what I am, without argument, a mother who says my hotel to a friend at the market without tightening around the words, and a sister who books through the same link as everyone else, because that is what a person does when a place is clear about who it is. They laughed, and then they booked. And the only thing I had to do between those two moments was build a space where laughing looked out of place and booking made perfect sense.